In 2019, there was $5.4 trillion of retail sales, Chris. What percentage do you think was online retail?
Like less than 20%.
Right. So most people say 50. It was 17. During COVID, that 17 went up to 19. And now it's down to 16 because people are back into stores. And digital retail has understood and learned, like Bonobos and Warby Parker and all of these online stores have learned that their CAC, customer acquisition cost, is significantly more, hundreds of dollars per customer versus rent in a retail setting. So in the next 3 to 5 years, we are going to see a crazy revolution of online digital retail opening physical stores because they can't afford to be online. They can't afford the costs of the customer. We are too distracted. There's too many choices. So retail is not dead, far from it.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Fort Podcast. My name is Chris Powers, and I want to thank you for joining me today. This show is an open-ended discussion and journey covering real estate, business, entrepreneurship, and investing. I would love to hear from you by tweeting me at Fort Worth Chris on Twitter. And if you've enjoyed this show, I would be super grateful if you would follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever platform you listen to. And if on Apple, it would mean a lot if you'd leave a rating and review. Last but not least, you can find all these episodes on YouTube. Thank you so much again for joining me, and enjoy the show. This episode is brought to you by Fort Capital. Fort Capital is a real estate investment firm based in Fort Worth, Texas, with a track record of transacting more than $1.6 billion in assets throughout Texas, Tennessee, and Florida. The team over at Fort is currently looking to acquire Class B industrial deals between $15 and $100 million throughout Texas, Florida, Tennessee, and now North Carolina and South Carolina. To learn more about Fort Capital, visit www.fortcapitallp.com. Beth, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited about today's show.
I am so excited, Chris. Thanks for having me.
And when I saw your last name was, I believe it's pronounced Azor. Is that right?
Azor.
Azor. So my mother, her maiden name is Azar, A-Z-A-R. So it's not very often you see the A-Z-O-R, A-Z-A-R. So I feel like we're already connected that way.
There you go. Well, that was my ex-husband's last name, but I kept it for our son's purposes. So there you go. My maiden name was a nice German name from Wisconsin, Boheim.
Okay. I love it. Well, you've built a fascinating career. I've really enjoyed following you on Twitter. And so let's just kind of start things off with, how does somebody become the leasing queen, the canvassing queen, the prospecting queen? You've built a really unique career, and I can't wait to talk about it. But how did it get started?
So it got started. My parents, we lived in Wisconsin. We owned a bar like Cheers, and my dad got his real estate license and started selling land in Florida. Kind of like, what you've read about. He worked for IT&T, where people put down $500, and then when they retired, they built a house on the land that they built in Florida. And during one of his trips, he took my mom and myself down to Florida, and we ended up buying a house. So we moved to Florida when I was 14. And my parents both had their real estate licenses, obviously, and ran a brokerage firm. So when I was 18, I got my license, because that's what you did when your parents were both in real estate. And during college summers, I would sit open houses and run around and do things for my parents with their business. When I graduated from Florida State, I got a degree in public relations and English literature, and I got a job in Miami. I followed a boy who became my husband to a not-for-profit, and I was a special events coordinator, making a whopping, Chris, $11,000. So in today's money, that's about 30, I think, 30 or 35. And so I couldn't live on that, but I had my real estate license. So on the weekends, I would sit open houses for a developer, and I think I was making $50 a day. So that was good money, $100 a weekend. And that supplemented my main job and career, which I loved, being a special events coordinator. After 2 years, I went from 11 grand to 23 grand. So, doubled my salary. But the executive director called me into her office one day and she said, "We love you, but your ambition exceeds us. And you should go do this real estate thing full time and just volunteer and be on our board." So that's what I did. And I went and worked full time for the group I was working for on the weekends. And they had been pushing me to come full time for a long time because I went from sitting open houses to selling the houses, and I was doing pretty well. But so I did that. I quit the job at the Heart Association and I went 7 days. So I went from working 7 days a week to 5 days a week, sitting in a trailer reading People magazines. And I went to the developer and I said, "We need to do something. We've got to bring people in here." Because I had only worked on the weekends and it was very busy. But during the week, there was no one. And he said, no. I said, "We need to have events." And he said, no, I'm building luxury homes and you just sit reading magazines. And when people walk in, you sell the house. And I was just crushed. I thought, I left a job I loved for money. How stupid is that? And I hated my job. And one weekend, we had a young woman that could come in to help us on Mother's Day weekend because we thought we were going to be very busy. And she said, "Well, I'm in commercial real estate. You should get into commercial real estate." And I said, "Yuck, that's selling land, isn't it? That's more boring than this." And she said, no, there's this thing called leasing, and developers build shopping centers and you do leases with the bagel guy and, strip mall Trent will hate this, but dry cleaners and, other small time businesses. And you will help those mom and pops achieve their American dream. And you'll be invited to every baptism and wedding and communion in the future going forward. And I said, "Done. Sign me up. Where do I go?" And she said, "Well, there's this company in Miami and they have a training program. You should call there." So I called there and I said, "Do you have a training program for people to learn how to lease shopping centers?" And they said, "Yeah." I said, "Who's in charge of it?" And they said this woman's name, and she was a sorority sister of mine in college.
Oh my gosh.
And, right. And so I call her up. I say, "Can I talk to her?" She picks up the phone and she said, "Is this Beth from Florida State?" And I said, "Yes." And she goes, "You're hired. Just come meet the boss." So I joined that firm. We had 11 people. And when I left the firm in 2004, I had been the president for 6 years. So I grew from the training program all the way through to eventually becoming the president. And then when I left, we had about 130 people.
Unbelievable. Okay. I don't often ask this because this is a bit of a personal question, but I already am feeling the ball of energy that you are. How did this come from your parents? Like, what about your childhood or growing up do you think you learned that gave you the drive and passion to, build a career and have a lot of fun doing it? You're clearly a self-motivated person. Is it something you can pinpoint growing up, or is it just a gift that you have?
No, for sure. My dad worked at a brewery in Milwaukee, Wisconsin during the day, and we owned this bar at night. So they were an entrepreneur. My mom was the secretary for this guy by the name of Wes Pavilon, who owned the Milwaukee Bucks.
Okay.
So she ran a lot of his businesses and owned the bar that my grandparents owned the bar and then passed it down to my parents. So both my parents had these full-time jobs during the day and then ran the bar at nights on the weekends. And my mom was always doing kids bus trips to the Bucks games or bowling tournaments or bowling leagues or pool leagues. And my mom was the workaholic in the family, very conservative, risk averse. And my dad was the dreamer. So luckily, I have a little bit of both, because you can't develop shopping centers and not be a dreamer and not be risk averse. So I got the dreaming part of him, and I have the workaholic part of her, and both of them juggled. So I can multitask really well. So I'm blessed that I got both of those things from them. They're both passed away, unfortunately, but I wish they were around, because the fact that they at 41 years old sold everything in Wisconsin. I mean, we had businesses and properties and lake cottages, sold everything and moved to Florida. not knowing what they were going to do boggles my mind, especially knowing how risk averse my mom was. My dad, the dreamer, must have really did a great sell job on her.
I love that story. It's clear that they both passed on gifts to you. Okay, so you leave. You're the president of this company in Miami. You start as a training associate. You become president. You grow it from 10 to over 100 people. What happened once you left? Is this when you began your own company, and that was the next step, or why did you leave, and what came after?
Sure. So when I left, I was 44 and I had a 4-year-old son, and I became a single mom 3 years prior. And so I'm running this big company in Miami, and I have a live-in nanny, and I'm racing home a 45-minute to an hour, 15-minute drive every night. And as I'm pulling in the garage, the nanny's shaking her head saying he's asleep. And I'm like, okay, I didn't have a son at 40 to not raise my son. My nanny was raising my son. So I went to my partner and said, I have to leave. And, that didn't go over well. So, you can take a lesser role, which, there's no way that was going to happen. Right. So I finally convinced him after about 6 months of negotiating that I had to really, go for my son Alex's benefit. And I had zero idea what I was going to do. I knew I wanted to start buying assets on my own account. I had been a limited partner with him on about 10 assets. And he had been the one that sourced it, financed it. I'm a great leasing agent. That's what I do. And I would lease the heck out of these properties, but I never did, the due diligence or, I did the market information, like the market comps, but I never did all of the rest. And I thought it's time for me, I don't know what I'm going to do. And there was a lot of people that were calling me, but they wanted me to have these big girl jobs, presidents or, big time jobs that would have taken me away from Alex. So right. I kind of semi-retired. We had some big closings. So I had enough cash in the bank to just, I became the room mom. I was the T-ball coach. I started doing some charity work, which I had wanted to do for a long time, ever since the Heart Association days that I couldn't do when you're running a big company. And, about 6 months in, a REIT out of Detroit called Ramco Gershenson called. They were a retail REIT, and they said, we just hired 4 kids out of University of Michigan. We want you to come and train them. Because I had been, during my time at the company in Miami, we never were successful hiring laterally. Like I couldn't hire someone from CB Cushman because we had just a very unique culture. And we worked really hard. We expected a lot from our agents, and it just never, transitioned well. So early on, I said to my boss and then the guy who became my partner, I said, we just need to grow our own. I'm going to go hire young kids and I'm going to teach them to do what I do. And that's how we're going to grow. And I think at the height of it, I had 14 leasing agents, which is a huge team for an independent, privately owned firm. But my reputation started growing that I was a good trainer or coach. And a lot of people just try to steal our people. And some were very successful because, I'd put a year into it of my time and energy, and they just offer them an extra 10 grand or a signing bonus and they got them. Yeah. And shame on us for not keeping them. But my reputation as a coach and a trainer grew around the country because people started meeting people. Well, how did you learn this? Well, Beth Azor trained me. So that started to happen. So when Ramco Gershenson called, I said, well, I don't really want to go to Detroit in January, but you have an office in Boca down here in South Florida. You have some properties. Send the kids down here for a week and I'll train them on your assets. And that happened. 2 of the people are still in the business today, which I'm very proud of. And the word started spreading. And now, I own properties, which I'm sure we're going to get to, but about 15% of my time, 15 or 20% of my time is training and coaching retail leasing agents around the country for firms, for REITs, for brokerage houses. All different kinds of groups hire me to come do classes or workshops or canvas with them and just teach them how to increase the value of their vacancies in their retail.
I love it. I'm on fire. You've already got me going. My head is spinning. Okay. A couple things come out of that, and then we're going to start digging into the madness that is leasing and buying retail properties. One thing you said, certain people didn't transition well. Once they had gone to a big firm and learned a culture, it was tough to get them to transition. Why is that?
Our expectations were super high. For example, we would go to our shopping center conferences and we would all wear the same thing and why was that? It's a marketing secret. If you walk into a networking event and 5 of you are in teal polo shirts,
Mm-hmm.
the room thinks there are 15 people walking in.
Mm.
So marketing gem number 1, we all wore the same stuff. So, and we did funny things like we would work during the savings and loan crisis. That's how old I am. We wore camouflage because we were fighting a war. And, and we just wore, we were full service and we wore service station outfits. Like a onesie, like a service station of your audience is too young to even know what this is, but it's like a one-piece thing with the zipper up the front. We did crazy things, and we expected, when the booths opened at 8:00, everyone had to be there at 7:30. We had an 11:00 curfew. It was crazy. And if you're commission only and you work for a brokerage firm, you're really kind of not even allowed to do that kind of stuff. If they're an independent contractor, you can't. There's rules in different states about what you can require your non-employees to do. So we made them employees. We gave them insurance, and we had all kinds of different compensation packages along the years. But we were the largest third-party provider for life insurance companies and pension funds. Mm. So I would always tell my leasing agents, we're working for the widows and children. Like this is they need to have a mission. Like this is I'm not just sending you back to get another $1 a square foot because we can make more commission. We're working for the widows and children of this pension fund. Mm. And this is our job to create value. So think of the bigger picture. Why are you going to meet in the middle and drop $2 a square foot when that equals, a $37,000 value drop? Like, don't be lazy. So that was kind of, we were just a very strange group, and it was different. And that's why transition was hard. What do you mean I have to wear camouflage? What do you mean I have to be there at 7:30? I don't have an appointment till 10:30. I'm going to get there at 10. And like, no. What do you mean I have a curfew? Like, no. But remember, I trained these are kids that I trained. I was like their mom, and no other groups trained. So there was some appreciation and loyalty because no one else took them in when they didn't know. They thought a square foot was a birth defect. They had no idea.
A square foot is a birth defect. Okay, I get it now. Once they kind of had thought one way, it was tough to transition. And candidly, I got to be honest, if I showed up tomorrow at your office and you told me to throw on a camouflage onesie to go to a conference, I don't know what I'd think about that. But did a lot of that, was that stuff that you made up along the way, or were you learning from other people and you just kind of best practices? Like, that is a unique culture. Did you develop that? Did it come from somewhere? Or was it a lot of trial and error?
Because remember I was communications and public relations. I always had a marketing mindset. How do we get attention, right? And today I just delivered a workshop chat with a company with 40 people in another state last week, and the headline of the talk was "Attention is Currency." How do you get attention? We got attention when we're walking around with camouflage shirts and pants, and it's war out there. Our theme of we would run ads in the shopping center program saying it's war out there, and it was war out there. So we just wanted to be different. So myself and my partner, we would come up with things like that. We had some crazy campaigns, some of which would not be allowed today. Yep. with today's culture that we're in.
Yeah. I like the old day culture better, but we don't have to get into that.
Yeah.
Okay. 2 definitions before we to start drilling into the nuts and bolts of how this all works. What is the definition of canvassing?
Knocking on doors for, in my case, retail mostly, but I did office last week. So it's going into a shopping center and I did it yesterday. We went into a nutrition store. We went into a fitness trainer, like a gym. We went into a nail salon, a hair salon, just walking in and saying, hi, do you have plans to expand? I own shopping centers in the area. That's it.
Yep. Is that the same definition as prospecting?
Same, but prospecting you can do. So when I hear the word canvassing, I'm physically going into their store or their place of business. Prospecting, I can DM on Instagram, I can DM on Facebook, I can cold call, I can send an email, I can send snail mail. So prospecting, I can be at a networking event and prospect. So canvassing is going into someone's place of business physically.
Okay. But in whether it's prospecting or canvassing, the goal there is to make connection with a tenant, to start building a relationship with them in hopes that you can basically do business with them in some form or fashion down the road.
Correct. And so what I'll say to people, I've canvassed over 10,000 businesses, and I've never done a deal the first time I've walked in. So my goal walking in is dialogue. And I leave a flyer versus a business card, because if the boss isn't in, the owner of the business, and they come back tomorrow and there's a business card with Beth Azor on it, that's going in the garbage. But if I leave a flyer and it has pictures of my shopping center or an empty restaurant with a hood and a grease trap, and I write how many tables, how many chairs, what the kitchen looks like, what equipment was left, what's the tonnage of the AC, that is going to get picked up and looked at if he's a restaurant owner.
While we're on the topic of expanding, do most tenants already know that they want to expand before they reach you, or is part of your job educating them on why they need to think about expanding, or is it both?
So I believe that every person who opens their first retail store have a dream to open more, every single one. Now, I do believe that a year in, a week in, 6 months in, 3 years in, they're like, what was I ever thinking? I can't do more of these.
Yeah.
But they still all are very interested in market information, because they all have signed leases with their landlord. So if I walk in and say, I own shopping centers in the area, are you thinking of doing any expanding in 2022 or 2023? They may not be, but they'll talk to me anyway, because they'll go, well, what are your rents? Like, they want information to help negotiate their potential renewal.
Yep. Got it. Okay. We'll get into the nuts and bolts of deals and tactics and things. But if somebody's coming to you for training, what are the Cliff Note versions of what are the big things that people need to walk away from after working with you? And maybe the question is just, if there were the critical components of an amazing leasing agent, what are they capable of doing? We've kind of covered prospecting and canvassing, why that would be important. And if you want to go deeper, great. What other things are you really driving home with people that separate an average leasing agent from an exceptional one?
So work ethic is the one thing you can control, right? You can't control a recession. You can't control the rental rates that your client wants you to get. You can't control if the place has visibility or no visibility. So work ethic is crucial. Like probably the number one reason for any success I've had is because I've outworked everybody. I started with a group of 3 other people. There were 4 of us. And in 3 months, I had my own listing, and it took the other people in the group months later. And I would show up on Saturdays. The boss was there. I just outworked everyone. So I think work ethic is key. And I think that the most important skill set in sales is to be a good listener. And that means you have to ask a lot of questions. So many people, I would say 90% of the world believes that to be a good salesperson, you have to convince someone. And I don't believe that at all. I believe that you are a matchmaker and you have to ask a lot of questions, and your product may help them in the match or may not. But you have to ask the question. So people say, well, I don't like to sell because I don't want to go in and, spew all of the facts. And that's not, I don't do that. I walk in and say, hey, do you have any expansion plans? Yes. Or, oh yeah, I'm thinking about it. Oh, okay, well, what do you like about this business, this location you're in, or what do you not like? Well, if they tell me I don't like it because it's super busy and my customers have nowhere to park, well, the particular property that I'm thinking of that I want to talk to them about also has a parking problem. So I would be honest with them and say, oh, well, the property that I need a nutrition store also has parking problems. So probably my center might not work for you.
I was watching one of your videos. When you think about especially canvassing, but prospecting too, the hardest part sometimes is just building the courage to go meet a stranger. I'm going to guess that you have an answer or at least a methodology for how, especially folks that might naturally be good at sales, but they've never done it or they're timid. I know it takes a lot of reps to get good at something, but what's kind of your answer to folks that say, it's scary to go walk in as a stranger into someone's business and start talking to them?
My answer to people that are afraid to go up to strangers, like if you're in a conference or a networking thing, my secret to that is walk up to the guy standing alone, because you're going to save them, because they are not happy they're standing alone. So if you do a beeline to the girl or guy standing alone, you literally just saved them, and you're going to be their best friend. So that's how I feel about when you're in a group setting in a cocktail party networking. And when you're canvassing and going store to store, you just got to rip off the Band-Aid. And I promise you that if you don't go in, if all you go in with the fact that I just want to leave this flyer, we have a shopping center down the street, like you don't even have to talk to anyone. Just say, hey, we have a shopping center down the street. May I leave this flyer? If you guys are ever interested, give us a call, and then get a business card and walk out. They're going to start talking. What do you mean? Oh, you have a shopping center? Oh, what do you have? Oh, I go to that Trader Joe's. Oh, I like that one. They're going to talk to you because they want to talk about real estate.
Yep. Yeah, we buy real estate and we cold call owners all the time. And some of the young folks that have worked for us, you say, it's kind of scary to, call an owner and ask if they want to sell their building. And I say, you're actually calling them and asking to give them money. There's almost not and in your case, you're kind of doing the same thing as how can we either save you money, make you money, put you in a better location. If you don't look at it as a sale, but you look at it as something you're giving them, it can change the tone of the conversation pretty quickly.
Absolutely. For probably from 1986 to 2008, I said the same opening line. Hi, we have shopping centers in the area. What are your expansion plans? For all that time. And then 2008 and 2009 hit. And I would walk into the stores and go, hey, what are your expansion plans? What? You're crazy. And I realized, I've got to change something I've been doing for a long, long time. So I changed it to say, hi, I have shopping centers in the area. Are you happy with your location, your rent, or your landlord? They were definitely not happy with one of those three. And that's when I could start the dialogue.
I love it. Okay. What are the main reasons why a tenant in a building would be happy with where they're at? And what are often the reasons why they would be unhappy where they're at? And let's assume in both situations, the tenant is financially feasible, meaning they don't like the location because they're not making any money. Or maybe you could answer it in the reason they're not making any money is because of X. But the general question is, what do great landlords do to make tenants happy, and why tenants would say they're happy? And what do tenants that often say they're very unhappy where they're at? What are the common reasons?
So all tenants are unhappy with their rent, no matter how much they're making. So let's just put that as the baseline. Okay. I mean, I have some tenants that love me and they still would like me to drop their rent.
That's fair.
Okay, so that aside, tenants that are unhappy have a roof leak and their landlord isn't calling them back.
Yeah.
That have overflowing dumpsters with the sushi guy next door putting raw fish, and they're a boutique and it stinks in their back door, and the landlord not calling back and taking action is, potholes in the shop, in the parking lot. The landlord doesn't stripe and seal or repave or refill potholes. Anything physically that makes it bad for their customer, those are the biggest things. Like during a hurricane we have in South Florida, the landlord not jumping on, there's a downed tree at the main entranceway. I literally take cash and call over the first guy in a pickup truck with one of those saw things, because I am going to get my shopping center entranceway open come hell or high water. Because if my tenants can open, if they're a grocery store or a 7-Eleven or Panera, someone that can get open and wants to provide business to the public, I'm going to make sure that they get open. So it's mostly lack of communication. I have sold shopping centers and then gone back and frequented, and been a consumer at my former tenants' locations and businesses, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, we didn't know how good we had it." I never dodge a call. I call all my tenants back, and sometimes they don't like the answer I give them, but I'm always going to call them back and hear them out and find out what the problem is. And a lot of in retail, air conditioning is like a big call. Always like, or my roof is leaking. Well, is it your roof is leaking, or is it your air conditioning that's leaking? And 90% of the time it's your air conditioning, and it's their responsibility in their leases. Their air conditioning, they take care of air conditioning. Yep. So they don't like that. Or a tenant moves in and they're in there a year and they call me and go, my air conditioner is dead, I have to replace it. That's a bummer. That's in your lease. You have to replace it. Now, have I in the past been a nice landlord and say, well, you've only been here a year. Let me, I'll throw in a couple grand. Maybe it depends on if they pay their rent on the first and I never have to call them, if they don't have overflowing garbage with sushi, it's a two-way street, right? We're a partnership. Now, when I was at the former company in Miami and I was working for pension funds, I had no leeway. The lease was the lease. And my asset manager in Des Moines, Iowa was not going to let me throw $3,000 towards, a tenant's air conditioning problem. But I, as the owner, can decide to do that if I want.
Yep.
Why would tenants love a shopping center landlord? When COVID hit, I put huge banners up. First I called all my restaurant tenants and said, move out into the parking lot. And they're like, well, what about the city? I said, I'll take care of the city. And I put big banners up. Our restaurants are open. To go is open. I did videos. I hired a videographer and, we went and did videos, and I did YouTube videos with my tenants, even because some of them were closed. I have a University of Miami apparel guy, and I said, you need to be the local ESPN. Everyone is starving for sports and for anything sports, show some highlights, interview former players, get on YouTube. And so I would give them ideas and help them promote their businesses. So, and sometimes they think I'm crazy, but remember, I'm that marketing, there's a marketing, like I love marketing. So if I can come up with an idea, I share it with my tenants.
Yep. They're kind of like your kids too.
They are my kids for sure.
Beth is everybody's mom,
but they
baby.
Pay me. I don't pay them. I'm like, they're not on the payroll like my kids are.
Okay. On the conversation of tenants, and we're going to keep inching closer into how deals work and don't, but I'm setting the stage with some good definitions and thoughts. You talk a lot about an impulse tenant versus a destination tenant.
You've done your homework.
Oh, I've done a lot of homework, Beth. I'm coming at you today with all good stuff. It's all your stuff. I'm just regurgitating it.
Okay.
What is an impulse tenant and what is a destination tenant? And maybe those are the only two I found. Are those the only two types of tenants?
Those are the main two tenants that fill every shopping center. Okay. And if you drove around the country and looked at all of the vacancy in the country in retail, most of it is what we call in the elbow parts of the shopping center. So you have U-shaped shopping centers, and in the two elbows at the base of the U is where most of the vacancy is around the country. And the reason that is it lacks visibility and exposure to the main street. So smart leasing agents have to lease destination tenants in those elbow spaces. And what they do instead many times is they take the call and H&R Block says, hi, I want to lease space here and I want your end cap, which is not a destination space, it's an impulse space. But H&R Block is a destination tenant. So we put the wrong tenants in the wrong spaces. And H&R, so if H&R Block called me, I'd say, I'd love to have you. but you've got to go in this corner space because you're only open 3 days, 3 months of the year. And I'm not going to put you on my end cap where I could get Chipotle, Starbucks, Panera. Though they will never go in the elbow space. They couldn't succeed or perform if they were in the elbow space. But H&R Block could be there, or an urgent care, or a daycare, or the podiatrist, or the karate, anything that is destination that you would drive by 30 to go to the one. So anything you have a membership. So, a karate, daycare, anything that you're going to go by 30 daycares to go to the one in Beth Azor shopping center, that is a destination tenant versus something you drive by and go, oh, ice cream, whoop, let me pull in. That is impulse. And impulse tenants need visibility. The ice cream person in the corner is never going to make it because Chris Powers is not going to drive by and you're not going to see them and then have the impulsive urge to go visit the ice cream or the yogurt or those types of uses.
Yep. And I'm not trying to get too far into the weeds, but just so I'm thinking about it right, an impulse tenant in theory could be a destination tenant, but not the other way around. Meaning I could be sitting at my house going, I want ice cream. I'm going to get ice cream. And therefore it becomes more of a destination tenant, but you could never have like a karate tenant that's like, nobody's ever sitting in their house going, I'm going to do karate right now. I'm just going to go find a karate store. Exactly. Yeah.
So when you own a property and you have spaces that are hard to lease, you have to say, why would Chris drive by 4 shopping centers to go to this use? So your doctor, anything kid membership related, right? Karate and, Pure Bar, anything that you have to sign up for, you're not, or like discount volume haircut, like Supercuts. That's an impulse. Oh, my kid needs a haircut. I'm going to go to the next haircut place I see. Well, I get highlights. I'm not going to the next hair salon I see. I'm going to go to my girl who I've been going to for 10 years.
Yep. I hear you. And, when an H&R Block calls and asks for that end cap, I mean, this sounds like shopping center 101, like any landlord would know this is the truth. But what you're saying is 90% of vacancy still exists in the elbows. Does H&R Block ever get the end cap? And if that was the case, is that the sign of a really weak shopping center?
No. So there's one time where I will give the end cap to a destination tenant.
Okay. Here we go.
And it's very mercurial. They pay 20, 30% more.
Got it.
They get the end cap.
Got it.
So, and I say to H&R Block, okay, my end cap's $30 a square foot. But if you want it, if you won't go in the elbow, then you pay 40 for the billboard and you can have it.
40 is better than 30.
But it is when I teach this in my workshops, it is people's eyes bulge out of their head.
Why?
They've never heard this before.
God.
They go, oh my gosh. And then I go through the exercise. They're all sitting there, there's like 6 to 8 people. I cap it because we go canvassing in the afternoon. And I say, okay, pick a shopping center where you have vacancy. Everyone's got it in their head. Do you have your vacancy in the corner space, in the elbow spaces? They all raise their hand. I said, now, do you have a physical therapist on an end cap space? They all raise their hand. Yeah. Because leasing agents take phone calls and the physical therapist says, I want to lease space in your shopping center and I love that space on the end cap. And the leasing agent says, great. And they don't, it's the path of least resistance. They don't want to try to sell them on. You can have the end cap for 40, but you can go inline for 30.
Yeah.
And have the whole dialogue of how do you get your customers? Nobody goes to physical therapy driving by going, look, physical therapy, I think I want to go in. It's referrals, right? It's for referrals from doctors. Don't you want to save $10 a square foot times 3,000, 30,000 a year times 150,000 on a 5-year lease term if you just go 4 doors down?
What do you call all the spaces in the middle from the elbow to the end cap?
If you can see them from the road, they're also impulse spaces. So The end cap is the A+ visible space, but the other ones between the end cap and the elbow are also usually have enough visibility and they have frontage. So all those spaces have maybe 18 to 22 feet of frontage if they're like a 1,200 or 1,500. The guy in the corner is usually a pie shaped with, 15 feet of frontage, and then it's a 4,000 square foot space because the developer was greedy and wanted to build as much as he could on the real estate.
Yeah. And is that why you often see just terribly shaped shopping centers? And I'm sure there's some you drive by these days that you're like, I cannot believe anybody actually ever built something in that shape. Is that usually just a
Greed.
Developer going, yeah, great, I'm going to try and get as many square feet as I can on this and I'll figure out how to lease it?
100%.
Does that still happen even today? Or are these, things of the past?
Met someone, the town that I own 3 centers in had me speak to this developer about 9 or 10 months ago. And he said, I'm going to build this strip center. And then behind the strip center, I'm going to build this strip of offices. And in the middle, I'm going to do kiosks. And I'm like, you're what? You're going to build a strip and then another strip and in the middle kiosks in an outdoor. I go, you're not going to lease it. So needless to say that plan went out the window. So, but yes, developers still do silly things to this day.
Okay. What is dwell time? You had a tweet and you said, if you increase your dwell time at your centers by 1%, sales increase by 1.3%. This is why I added benches and music. So I'm assuming this is time that people hang around longer than they should.
Yes. So I have a small 42,000 square foot shopping center. I have a Panera. I have a Mission Barbecue. I have a phenomenal sub place. I have T-Mobile. I have a nail salon, 2 hair salons. I have a hobby store. So I added benches. I had a music, like a music academy where kids came and took lessons. And where I got this idea from is one day I drove up to the shopping center and I saw all of these people in these like SUVs. And like, what's going on? Like, why are these people sitting in their cars? And I realized it was the music academy parents. So I called my maintenance guy and I said, go over to Lowe's. There's $100 benches, buy 6 of them and put them in front of the, like on either side line them up outside of the musical academy. Well, what happened is those people got out of their cars and they sat in the benches. So now when I'm showing space, the property looks more active because there's people milling around. And our shopping center association, ICSC, published a report that said, if you can extend dwell time, this is pre-COVID, obviously, the longer you can extend dwell time, the more people will think, oh, well, I have a battery store. And when they're running in and out from the sub place, they might not think of it. But if they're hanging out outside of the nail salon because their nail tech's not ready yet, and they see the battery store, they might go in and buy an $8 battery, right? So, and then I added music. So now I have this little strip center that is usually not a place where you have benches and music. That's usually for the more fancier mixed use properties, but my sales are super high. I'm not saying that they are super high because of the benches and the music, but my tenants love it. The consumers love it. They love the music, and they're eating their ice cream and their yogurt, and they're sitting on the benches.
Yeah. Another thing you talked about, you said your competitor is your best friend in the shopping center leasing game. The center's agent across the street can give you more leads than you can handle. How does that happen? So
we all have exclusives in retail, right? And some of us, I have a property across the street. It's an 800,000 square foot property. Remember, I'm 42,000. And Susan is the leasing agent, and they give tenant improvement dollars. I do not. Okay. So I have leads all the time that I send over to Susan, and she sends leads to me because she's got this big, huge property. I don't. She doesn't have visibility and exposure like I do. I'm right on the road. So constantly we are saying, well, I can't do it, but go call Susan. And we're constantly sharing leads. We have a thing in the market. We have 6 of us that own that are leasing properties in like a 1.5 mile radius. And twice a year we get together. We have what's called dead deal meetings. And everyone's supposed to come with 2 deals that died that we were working on in our property. And they died for whatever reason, a myriad of reasons. And we, each one of us, the 6 of us, bring the 2 deals. So there's 12 deals that we were all negotiating on in our 1.5 mile area. So these were 12 people, 12 businesses that wanted to be here. And we exchanged them. And I think probably out of, let's say, the last 10 dead deal meetings we've had over the last 5 years, I think probably 5 deals were made.
Wow. Okay.
Just sharing, like, okay, I tried to do this barber shop called Man Cave, but then they wanted to have liquor. I couldn't have liquor because my property, I just couldn't get it for whatever reason, the liquor license, blah, blah, blah. I sent it out to the group, the dead deal group, and one of them did the deal. I wanted to do the deal, but I couldn't do it. So, and the guys they're calling me saying, I want to be in this area. Now, maybe they could on their own go drive around, but it's hard for these businesses to get, sometimes the property owners don't have leasing signs. So it's just making it faster and easier. The more occupied, Chris, they are, the more rent I get to charge. So we are all in this together, and we should all want all of our occupancies to grow.
Got it. You just kind of mentioned something, so I'll just ask, what would be a reason that you wouldn't provide TI knowing that your competitor across the street does provide TI? You just feel like you have a better, you have more leverage in a better location, or is it deeper than that?
I'm allergic to it. and everyone knows, like, I have 2 interns here working with me this summer, and we were calling for a market study last week, and we were calling a firm in town, and the young lady said, so we did a deal. She was telling us we were collecting market comps, and she said to my intern Daniela, so Daniela, I'm going to tell you how we got $40. And the reason we got $40 in rent is what's called bought up the tenant. Let me tell you what this means, because I know you'll never hear this from Beth, because she's allergic to tenant improvement money. So that, as much as people know I'm the canvassing queen, they also know that I'm allergic to, the woman across the street works for a huge REIT, and they have lots of money. Okay, I am just Beth Azor. I pay the mortgage. I have a couple partners. I'm not giving $50 a square foot to anybody. I'll find someone else that doesn't need that. And, have I given $10 a square foot in TI? Yeah, but I can bet your bottom that the tenant put in 20. Like, I would never be the one that's buying a tenant to up the rental rate. I have a big problem with that.
And is that because you don't sell properties? Like, if you were a seller, wouldn't you want to buy the tenant to up the rental rate?
Yeah, I don't sell.
Got it.
Yeah, I don't sell. Yeah.
What's occupancy cost ratio?
So occupancy cost ratio is where you take your rent. So let's say 1,000 square feet, $20 a square foot, $20,000 a year in occupancy costs for rent, and then divide that into the sales per year of the tenant. So if it's 20,000 in rent, and you divide that into let's say they do 500,000, whatever that percentage is, what's 20 divided by 500,000, or 20 divided by 200,000, but there would never be sales that low, would be a 10% rent factor. And that's the rule of thumb. The rule of thumb is the tenant should never pay more than 10%. It's not a healthy ratio.
Right.
So when I was thinking about selling a shopping center a few years ago, and I hired an investment sale broker because I don't do that. I'm a leasing person. And he said, before he got down into the nitty gritty with my rent roll and my sales of my tenants, he's like, the cap rate's not going to be as high because you have so many local tenants versus national credit. And then he calls me back 3 days later and he goes, mark that wrong. He said, your sales and your occupancy costs of your tenants are so low, they're 4 to 5%, that national credit tenants get a low cap rate because of certainty of staying around. When you have local tenants, a sub guy doing $2.4 million and his occupancy cost is 3%, no buyer is going to think that they're flighty or not going to live out their lease term.
Right.
So collecting sales and understanding and having occupancy costs across the board on your property is really, I didn't know how valuable it was. And I just like to do it because I always wanted to know, how are my tenants doing? And again, being the leasing agent, do I need to replace them? Are they healthy? Do they need to expand? So I'm always looking at the health. I don't get percentage rent. I'm just focusing on how is the health of my shopping center. When I bought one of my shopping centers, I had this sub guy that was killing it. And I went and got Panera. And Panera said, no, the prior owner of the shopping center called me a million times. So I'm not interested. I said, did he ever tell you the sales of my sub shop? 7 months later, I had a Panera.
Well, that brings up a good point, because you said lease clauses I rarely give up on, but many landlords do, are 1, sales reporting, 2, relocation clause, and 3, grace period to pay rent. So let's kind of expand on sales reporting again. So in the lease, you require them to provide kind of monthly numbers. Is it quarterly, annually?
So I want always monthly. I will give quarterly or annually, depending, like, if it's a national tenant like Mission Barbecue, they're going to give me sales on an annual basis. But if I'm doing a local sub shop, that guy's giving them to me monthly.
And that's just because one's more predictable than the other?
No, it's just the local tenants can't get away with as much as the national tenants can.
Got it.
The national tenants, I'm not going to lose a Mission Barbecue deal over monthly versus annual.
Got it. And you already said you don't do percentage rent deals.
I don't. Malls do percentage rent deals and fancy properties do percentage rent deals. The only way I would ever do a percentage rent deal, so there's a lot of discussion right now going on. I'm speaking at a conference in Vegas next week, and we just got a list of questions, and there's a lot of talk about percentage rent. There's 2 kinds of percentage rent deals. There is percentage rent deals where you get a base rent, and then if you do well, if you do well, we both do well because I'm going to take a part of your business, right? So anything over $1 million, the landlord gets 5% of sales. That's the base plus percentage. Since COVID, there's a lot of properties in a lot of markets that are still hurting, especially C-class malls, and they've gone to get rid of the base rent totally and are just doing percentage rent deals.
Got it. Okay.
So that is in cases of recession or COVID or C-class malls where the occupancy is very low and you've got to drive traffic and you've got to get tenants in. So those are called percentage rent only deals. So I have done crazy deals. In 2019, December, or actually October, I said, we're going to have a Christmas like no other. People have been shut in. They're going to buy toys galore. There's a shipping delay problem. Amazon's got delay problems. There's Toys R Us is closed. I'm going to go find a toy store and bring them in my little 42,000 square foot shopping center. So I canvassed, I prospected, I found 9 toy-like stores in South Florida. And I called all of them and I said, free rent for 3 months. And they're like, one guy, a hobby store, called me back. He did remote control cars and trucks and said, what's the catch? I said, no catch. I said, I want you to do so well that you sign a long-term lease with me in January. And he didn't really believe me. I go, come talk to my tenants. I've done this before. So they came, I showed him the space. I said, you take the space as is. You got to fix it up. You got to merchandise it. You got to pay me insurance and give me a deposit. They killed it. They did about $350,000 and they opened October 15th and they killed it. And he signed a 3-year lease. And so I'll do that. But I would also, if someone came and I really wanted them, I would do, if my rents were $50, I might do $25 plus percentage rent. I could do that. It gets to be very complicated, right? Calculating the percentage. It's let's just make a deal. I'll give you, let's do 6 months of half rent. And then if you're doing well, we'll do a real deal. I'd rather do something like that.
Yeah. But in all those cases, they're putting up some dollars to get in. So they've got some skin in the game right off the bat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Relocation clause.
Never. I did 100 and one of my first big deals was a Home Depot. It was 160,000 square foot Home Depot in Miami. And I paid $800,000 to, I think, an 800 square foot dentist office. I mean, the guy, 800 square foot dentist office was in the way of my Home Depot deal, which of course was not in the way, but he had a year left on his lease. I think he was paying $8 a square foot, where the rest of the tenants were paying in the 20s. And I literally had, that was in 1989. The only way I'll give up on a relo is it's like Panera Bread they're on an end cap with the drive-through. I'm not going to relocate Panera Bread, but I will not give up. You have one bad experience like that, that lease clause never gets negotiated.
And a relocation clause on behalf of the landlord basically says, I have the right to move you. And
I pay for everything.
And you pay for everything.
I pay for everything. And I'm doing it right now. I'm moving a lighting store because I have it's 4,000 square feet and I've got a 10,000 square foot urgent, like Fortune 500 urgent care coming in. And I'm moving the lighting store. It's going to cost me $300,000, but the 10,000 square foot Fortune 500 urgent care is, it's the reason why we're doing it.
Right.
So when you move you have the right to move the tenant. You have to you have to give them a new space, just like their existing space. You have to pay for the change of their letterhead if they have it. But so I always tell people, look, it's going to be a unbelievably great deal for the shopping center if I'm going to move you.
Yeah. And to be clear, you couldn't move someone from like an end cap to the elbow.
No, it has to be comparable spaces.
Got it. Okay. Grace period to pay rent.
My mortgage is due on the 1st. And you will pay me on the 1st.
Yep.
I do not give if they say, no, I'm a big company. Now again, everything I say, if Home Depot wants a 10-day grace period, Chris, I'm going to give Home Depot a 10-day period. But I'm talking about the most of the local and regional tenants.
Yeah.
So what I've done is say, look, you want a grace period, then your rent's due on the 20th. And I'll give you a 10-day grace period.
Yeah.
And they look at me and they go, what? I go, that's your grace period. Your rent's due on the 20th. And you got to pay it by the 1st. My mortgage is due on the 1st. I'm not a big company.
Yep.
And on the 2nd, they get a late fee. And on the 3rd, they get a 3-day notice. So I can tell you with 100% certainty, I have 107 tenants as of the 5th of every month, because by the time, they pretty much by the 3rd of every month, I'm 100% collected.
Yep.
They know I don't mess around with that. And most of them now, 3 years ago, we started the ACH. It's in the lease. It's a requirement. So I don't, I just say you have to sign with ACH. I'm not going to chase you.
Yep. A mentor of mine told me really early on, basically exactly what you just said is if a tenant calls and they've got every excuse in the book, which they always do, you just say, look, here's the number to my bank. You call them, and if you can convince them to move my mortgage date to the 3rd from the 1st, and they're okay with it, then I'm okay with you moving yours to the 3rd. And
there you go.
I think that's the game of real estate. It can sound like, oh man, you guys are so strict by the rules, but as soon as you kind of waver on them and you're known as a landlord that doesn't abide by the lease, I mean, it leads to just a lot of bad business down the road. It just creates bad habits for everybody.
Yeah. And then look, if you're not on that, I've bought properties where the guy allowed the tenants to pay by the 20th or the 25th. Here's the problem. They have a bad month.
Yeah.
It's now the 1st of the next month.
Right.
And then the next thing you know, they're 2 months behind. It's easier for them to close their doors and do a midnight move out than to come current on a $10,000 or $15,000 delinquency.
Right.
So landlords that are not on this create their own vacancies.
Right. Just on the topic of leases, is there anything else besides the standard clauses that you've learned over the years are must-haves in a lease or must not haves in a lease?
So must-haves is an opening date. Because in the world of permitting, in South Florida, it can take 4 to 6 months to get a permit. I have a guy that is, not even open, and I signed the lease over a year ago. Now, so opening date and rent commencement date. So he's been paying rent since October. So I feel bad for him, but I gave him 9 months to get his permit and construct. So he's about to open probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So I'm very happy, but I feel bad for him. But opening date, because sometimes people, they delay. I signed a lease with an Indian restaurant and they went to India for 3 months.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the heck? Well, we had this vacation planned, well, then you shouldn't have signed the lease till you got back. So having an opening date that you can default them on and having a rent commencement date also make very, very important, so that the rent starts, even if they're lollygagged and, didn't get around to building their store and getting their permit, that's not my problem, because I'm taking space off the market.
Yep. And
too many landlords don't have that. Recently, something new I've learned, so doing this for 36 years, I'm still learning. I've had tenants recently been playing a game with possession of delivery of possession, where I don't deliver possession until they give me their insurance. So most tenants want to get in fast, but there's those few that are doing plans and going in for permit, and they know they don't need the possession. So they play a game with, I haven't gotten my insurance yet. So now we're adding something in the lease now about that. Like, if you don't give me your insurance and take possession within 2 weeks of execution, you're in default.
Yep. That's why they call you the queen.
You learn from these. You learn. I was like, why haven't we given possession yet? Oh, well, they didn't get their insurance. It's been 2 months. Like, hello, they're playing a game with you guys.
Last question on leases. Was there anything, there was probably some clauses maybe that were temporary during COVID, but is there anything kind of I'm going to go ahead and say we're in a post-COVID world now. We can say that. Is there anything that is going to linger on, lease clauses that tenants are still fearful of, that landlords kind of have to accept? And you don't have to talk about all landlords. You can talk about yourself. But is there anything you're doing post-COVID that you had never done before and you're kind of forced to do it because that's now market?
So there are a lot of landlords that are having to deal with COVID language. And because I'm fortunate to be in South Florida, where the demand is high and the supply is low, we are not. But I have friends all around the country that are dealing with the COVID language, which is, if the government shuts us down, we don't have to pay rent. So we did have, I had a national tenant that we were negotiating with in the middle of COVID, and they had their sister company was, so I have one third party gig, and this is my client, and we have a sister company that during COVID, they were shut down for 3 months, and my client deferred their rent to the end of the lease term. They said, okay, you don't have to pay these 3 months, but you've got to pay it at the end of the lease term. And the national anchor tenant, who's an apparel tenant, said, okay. So now we're in the middle of COVID and we're finalizing a lease with their sister company, another apparel use. And they said, we need to add this COVID language. And I said, oh no, we're not doing that. And they're like, well, no, you have to do it. I go, well, we're not doing it. We're building you a building. Okay, my client's not going to get a loan from the bank to build the building, which is going to cost $6 million if we have COVID language in the lease. Well, what are we going to do if the government shuts us down again? I go, you're going to call us like you did in the last lease where we didn't have COVID language, and he will work with you. That's what we're going to do. And so they signed the lease without COVID language. But there are places in the country that the sales are not what they are with national tenants like they are down here, that absolutely the tenants are taking advantage of the situation, and that landlords are concerned. If you have a shopping center with 3 vacant boxes and you want Burlington coat, you're going to give them the COVID language because you need to fill your vacant boxes.
Yep. You'll probably remember a tweet I made, and you corrected me.
Uh-oh.
But I said, no, I deserved it. I said, pop-up shops are a warning. They never go in great retail locations. And you said, that's not true. Maybe it's where I'm from. I tend to find that pop-up shops are in places where they're actually trying to fill vacancy that never gets filled. But maybe expand on that. Are pop-up shops, are they the new thing? Like, why would a great property want to have a tenant that kind of comes and goes?
Okay. So my hobby store, that was a pop-up shop.
Okay.
He could have absolutely not done well and moved out in January. And I only have 3 vacancies in this property, but I knew it was going to be a destination tenant, Chris, that drove traffic during the holidays, and it's a retailer. So in the world of shopping centers today, 20 years ago, we had things like there'd be shopping centers with 5 shoe stores, right? That doesn't exist anymore, and that's because of Amazon, Walmart, and Target. Right. And Zappos. Okay. So what happened with digital is we lost the pure definition of retail. So now our shopping centers are filled with restaurants, personal care, which means barber, nails, hairs, and fitness like Pure Barre, Stretch Zone. And long gone are the days with hobby shops or card stores. They're gone. They don't exist anymore. They're online or they're in malls.
Yeah.
So for me, during COVID, I did a ton of pop-ups. I went to a warehouse district where a gym equipment company had a 50,000 square foot warehouse full of gym equipment. And I said, you need to come to my shopping center and and I had a Pier 1 that closed. I said, bring all this equipment, not all of it, but bring a bunch of this equipment into my 8,000 square foot empty Pier 1, because everyone's opening gyms in their homes. And you should be next to my grocery store, Aldi, and how great would that be? And you bring it into the suburbs, because who the heck wants to come out here to this 50,000 square foot warehouse? So we did that, and he was not successful. Now, so he lasted 6 months. That was a pop-up shop that didn't work. Another pop-up shop that didn't work is I found a billiards guy, pool tables. I went to see his space. It was so cool. Awesome. Like high-end $3,000 pool tables, pinball machines, like man cave bar setups. And I did the same thing. I gave him a 6,000 square foot space for 6 months. And I think I charged him, $1,000 a month, nothing. He also didn't make it. He filled the space with cool pool tables. And it was in the place where I had the lighting store and I had a kitchen and design store. And he didn't make it, but my hobby shop made it. And I did a deal with a blinds and drapery guy, and he made it and signed a 5-year lease. So yeah, if I'm not putting in fireworks stores, right? I'm putting in stores. I'm literally going and saying, what's going on in the world today? People are outfitting gyms in their homes. Okay, let me go get a gym equipment guy to put in, because he's adding something of value. He's bringing traffic to my center that I normally wouldn't have. Yep. And I'm willing to roll the dice on the fact that what if he does $350,000 in 3 months and signs a long-term lease? Yep. Okay. So I do think that there are centers that do pop-ups that have fireworks in them. And that's when you've got 15 vacancies and they're just desperate. Yep. But there's more now, and I think malls, right? C malls, you're going to see pop-ups in malls because the occupancy is 20% and they've got to fill space, so they're going to do pop-ups at percentage rent only deals. So you're right that there are some pop-ups that are the sign of death. Yep. But not all of them.
Rest in peace to all the Class C malls out there.
Right. Look, Lululemon is doing pop-ups all over.
Yeah.
You would agree if a Lululemon popped up, you wouldn't think that's a sign of death, right?
No, that's fair. So I guess it's situation by situation, but I totally get it now. Is there ever a time where a tenant brings too much traffic to an area? I remember our friend Strip Mall Trent said he declined a Chick-fil-A in his, I guess it was a pad site he could have sold at one of his centers because they just bring too much traffic. You think of like a Starbucks with drive-throughs. Are there tenants you say no to because you say, you're too successful or you bring too many people to the table?
Chick-fil-A is definitely causing a lot of problems around the country. And even though we all love them, there are absolutely developers that are starting to think this is more of a problem than we want to have. So he isn't the first person I've heard that's said that. I don't know if I could turn one down. The center where I have the hobby store, I have a big parking problem there because I have $16 million worth of restaurant traffic in a 42,000 square foot shopping center. So I am very careful about parking and traffic. And I also, that's the same center that I have the University of Miami apparel guy. So on Saturdays and home games in football season, I have rented the office parking lot next door, paid money, and told my tenant employees to go park over there to alleviate the craziness on football games Saturdays. Now they don't go park there. So I tried that once. This is being an active, engaged landlord. Let me help. I'll go rent this lot. You tell your employees to go park there, but the employees don't park there. So I stopped doing that. I did it all through this one football season, and then we stopped. Because if you can't help I can't help you if you don't want to help yourself. But I will tell people, we'll send memos around. Okay, big game this weekend, Miami versus FSU. Please, warn your customers to come after 4:00 when everyone's down at Miami at the game. Like, I will try to give them the heads up. So there are situations where there is too much parking. I had a gym that wants to come to my property, and I said, okay, are you a trainer gym, like one-on-one? Oh no, we have classes of 40. Okay, I can't put that in my center. I can't have classes of 40 people. That's 40 cars. I don't have the space.
Yep. That's a good problem to have. Can't have you. You're too successful, and so am I. How does this, Uber Eats, DoorDash, how does this delivery economy impact shopping centers? I've talked to restaurant owners that have said, one, and we don't have to get into the margins that restaurants make. I know they basically take all the margin, but they also say, look, our restaurant wasn't designed to have, 15 people from DoorDash sitting in the lobby waiting for these orders to happen. As a retail landlord, like, how do you think about that? Do you think about it? What's your opinion on that?
So I didn't think about it. Well, let me back up. So my sub guy that does 2.4 million, okay, he was always after me for a parking space. I want a parking space. I'm like, I'm not giving you a parking space, because if I give it to you, I've got to give it to everyone else. And then I went to this conference called Shop Talk. This is like in 2018. And Starbucks and Chipotle and all these people were up there saying that their buy online, pick up in store concepts that was brand new back then, they were increasing their sales by 30%. Mm. And I sat in this audience and I went, oh my gosh. And I went back and I called Harry, the owner of the sub place, and I said, Harry, I have a deal for you. And he goes, what's that? I said, I'm going to give you your parking space, but you have to have an app. Because this guy, when I bought the shopping center, he didn't even take credit cards. Okay. So he now takes credit cards, and he saw his business increase. I go, you have to have an app. And he said, okay, well, we're kind of working on that. I go, well, when you tell me when you have it, and I'll give you the parking space. Chris, do you know when he got the app?
When?
March 1st, 2020. He would have been out of business because he was a phone call guy. First of all, the restaurant was shut down and he could only do to-go orders. They wouldn't have enough phones, So by having the app that he put in 7 of his locations, he sent me the biggest rose bouquet ever, because I saved his business because of this. So he has a parking place now, and it says for to-go orders, for whether it's buy online, pick up in store, DoorDash, or whatever. But I will tell you the brilliance, you learn this from tenants. I signed a lease 6 months ago with a sushi guy. He has 4 other locations. So he comes in and he goes, you see this back door? It was an old burger place, and in the back, it was 2 spaces. And so he had 2 back doors. And one of the back doors was set. It had like a sidewalk. It wasn't flush all the way to the back of the center. And he goes, you see that door? I go, yeah. He goes, I'd like to put a to-go window there. I go, brilliant. So not only did the guy put a to-go window in this back door, he put a bench and he put a sign. And when on the window of the front of the space, it says to-go orders around the corner. And before he had that sign, I was in the restaurant and he had all of these DoorDash people coming into the restaurant. And I go, you got to put a sign. And so he has outdoor seating, and they walk behind the outdoor seating to this back door and window. And all of now everyone's used to it. All the DoorDash guys, the Grubhub guys, the Uber Eats guys, they all go back there. It doesn't muck up my front parking lot, right? With these guys sitting there with the cars running. They go in the back, which is an empty back parking lot. It's a beautiful thing. And he put plants by the bench. It's great. So I learned from him. I thought it was a brilliant idea.
I love it. That was Harry?
No, that was Fat Boys Sushi. PHAT. And they're wonderful people from Australia.
I love it. I just want to be a tenant in one of your buildings, I think, and have mom help manage me. All right. What is the circular economy?
Okay. So the circular economy is sustainability.
Okay.
Right. It's about instead of having styrofoam to-goes, having, edible things that you can eat with your takeout or your leftovers. It was the main topic at Shop Talk 3 months ago. Every tenant was talking about the circular economy. They were talking about bags instead of plastic bags for apparel stores, that they have to be material bags or canvas bags, that everything has to be recyclable. And it went so far as, how sometimes you get a cup and then you put the cup inside like another cup, like there's containers inside of containers and for food. And it was just every topic and every panel talked about the circular economy and how we need to be thinking about recycling and the environment.
Okay. I saw you had talked about that, so I figured I'd ask. We're going to call this last segment Beth Buys a Property. The one thing I didn't cover, and maybe we can just make this part of this topic, was common area and stuff of that nature. But when you buy a property, you've got 36 years of knowledge about this stuff. What gets you to a quick no? And let's just assume that the price is right, because we can always say that for the right price, we might stretch to buy things we wouldn't otherwise buy. But what are you looking for in a property that fits your criteria? And what are some things that get you to a absolute no immediately so you don't waste any time on it?
So for me, it's supply and demand. So I get people that call me and say, I found a deal, $25 a square foot. I'm like, okay, where is it? And they tell me the submarket, and I'm like, there's 40 empty shopping centers. Like, I'm not buying. You couldn't pay me to take the center. I'll buy a center. I have a center under contract right now for $900 a square foot, and the vacancy in the market is 1%. I want properties where the demand is high and the supply is low, bar none. That's my first go-to. The second thing is I don't want elbows. So I want perpendicular, strip centers that run parallel to the main street. I don't want it to be U-shaped. I may buy a U-shaped center, but most of my centers are flush to the street. And I like high income because high income is disposable income, which means good sales, and rent is a function of sales. So I want people in the area to buy the $8 sub. And I want, if I can, the pièce de résistance is a university or a hospital nearby. So that's for daytime pop, so that I get lunch business and dinner business. So those are so it starts with supply and demand. Again, I don't care if it's $1 a square foot. I'm not buying it if there's 40 empty shopping centers, because I'll never be able to rent it. I'll never be able to lease it, because everyone's going to always try to lowball the next guy.
Right. When you go to develop some of these, are you building spec, or do you already have several tenants on the hook that have signed leases before you go vertical?
So I've built 2.
Okay.
Centers. After I built the first one, I said I'd never do it again, and now I did it again. So the first one, I had Starbucks, and we bought the land spec. We didn't start building until we had, I think I had Starbucks and Verizon signed up. So I had 50% with signed leases before we broke ground. The second one I built I had Starbucks. I built it's a 3-tenant strip. The other 2 spaces were built and not leased. I built them spec and then I leased them, and now they're both leased.
As the landlord, and maybe it varies by property, are you doing triple net leases or are you doing gross leases?
Triple net. I bought one shopping center 8 years ago and they were all gross leases, and I've converted all 11 tenants except for one to triple nets.
So what are you responsible for as the landlord? And really, maybe this is a question for retail owners and the answer might be nothing, but is there something that you're responsible for to maintain, a lively presence, a clean parking lot? You obviously said you do benches and music, but is there something required for shopping center owners that maybe you wouldn't see in other asset classes that you're required to do for the tenants to make sure it's a great place for customers to arrive to, or is that the tenant's responsibility?
So that's super subjective, right? I think that the requirement is open entranceways.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. That's a must have, which goes back to the hurricane thing, like open entranceways, man. I mean, you don't want to have potholes, so that would be good too, but you got to have open entranceways. That's the must have. And then clean, well lit is a liability. Like, my property manager knows I better not ever do a light check at night and there's a pole light out, because that's just a liability. But it also is, if the woman is the main customer in the family and she's not going to come to my Aldi grocery store at 9:00 at night if the parking lot's not well lit. So my parking lots tend to look like used car lots. Like, we add lights to the poles.
Oh yeah. Is it true that grocery stores usually pay lower rent than the rest of the tenants because they're the main traffic generators?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. The question that came in off Twitter is, why don't you like CoStar? And maybe you can answer that, and then you can follow up with, is there any online tools or software tools that you do like to use? Even as simple as Google Earth. Maybe you like to use that. But I think the first was, why don't you like CoStar?
Because I don't think it's accurate. And I don't have it. I've never had it. And I am in a lot of landlord groups where all they do is complain about how much it is. Yeah. So I think there's definitely a disruptor. Someone should be disrupting that. But basically, they take our information and they sell it back to us. I don't, it's a good business plan. I guess a lot of people use it. I just don't think it's accurate. And so you can imagine I'm out all the time. I do my own market surveys. Like, I get my own comps. Yep. So I have my job is I'm teaching my interns how to do market studies. And we talked to 5 brokers today who told us, okay, we did a deal with a vet and this is what we paid and this is how much I'm getting accurate information. Now, if I was buying shopping centers across the country, I probably couldn't do that, right? Yeah. I probably would have to rely on some online thing, but I don't have to do that. I'm in my market. I know most of the people. If I don't know them, I'll meet them and I will get them to tell me the real deal. Yep. So I do think it has a purpose. I just don't know anyone that loves it. I would not want to be the CEO of a company that everyone hates. Like, fix it, man, fix it.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think I've ever met anybody that loves CoStar yet. Everybody's forced to use it, or at least everybody thinks they're forced to use it.
Yeah.
Okay, real quick. You just said something interesting. I just want to dig in for a second. You've got interns and you want to do a quick market study. You're calling brokers. Maybe you're calling tenants. How does Beth conduct if we said I had to conduct a market survey in less than a day, what would you do? Or what would you tell people to do so that they could get pretty dialed in on a market relatively quickly?
So if they don't know their leasing agents in that represent the properties in the market already, it would be impossible to do it in a day.
Okay.
It takes my interns 5 drafts to get their first one right. And so today we were calling people that weren't calling them back. So then I got 4 of them today, because I have the relationships, and that, we don't want, if you have a relationship with someone, you want to help that person. Yeah. So I think I could do it in a day if it was in South Florida. If you sent me to Cleveland, I couldn't do it in a day because I don't know anyone.
Yeah. Okay.
And I guess you'd pull it off of CoStar, which everyone knows it's 70% accurate. So I guess that's good enough if you're in a hurry. And you understand that you're going to reduce the accuracy level. You're going to have a grade lower versus the one I do that might take me a week. If I'm doing it, it might take me a week to get everyone, because I'm really I want to know, what were your last 3 deals? Did you give to, like I told you the story about the person who said, so we bought up this deal. I mean, people aren't telling people that information unless you have a relationship.
And one thing I didn't ask earlier, but while we're on the quick topic of surveys, it's all in retail. It's all about traffic count. Is that a really big deal? I always hear about that. And if it is, why and how is it kind of used in your line of business as a leasing agent or as a shopping center owner?
Traffic counts are important to Chick-fil-A and Chipotle. They're and mattress stores. Traffic counts are important for freestanding buildings up on the street where they want the eyeballs.
Okay.
If you're TJ Maxx, you don't really care about the traffic. No one, I can't remember the last time anyone asked me about a traffic count on the street.
Right. Okay. So it's more for impulse tenants. Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Here's the final question.
Dun, da, da, da.
And I know you're going to have a great answer for this. And I know that the word retail is actually a very general term. So I know that the answer could be slice and dice in a lot of ways, but for some reason, the media likes to say retail's dead. It doesn't work anymore. And then I have this great conversation with you, and you tell me that all your centers have not enough parking, and tenants are doing $16 million of restaurant sales and this and that. What do you tell people that go, Beth, isn't retail dead?
Good question. So in 2019, there was $5.4 trillion of retail sales, Chris.
Mm.
What percentage do you think was online retail?
Like less than 20%.
Right. So most people say 50.
Mm.
It was 17. And in 1960s, before you were born, there was this thing called catalogs. And Sears and Penny's and Spiegel had catalogs. There were big fat books that were mailed to people's houses, and they ordered off of the catalogs. And that was 10% of retail. Since COVID, during COVID, that 17 went up to 19. And now it's down to 16 because people are back into stores. And digital retail, online retail, has understood and learned, like Bonobos and Warby Parker and all of these online stores have learned that their CAC, customer acquisition cost, is significantly more, hundreds of dollars per customer versus rent in a retail setting. So in the next 3 to 5 years, we are going to see a crazy revolution of online digital retail going back or opening physical stores because they can't afford to be online. They can't afford the costs of the customer. We're too distracted. There's too many choices. So retail is not dead. Far from it. Bad retail is dead. There are definitely in the country, I think there's 3,000 malls. They're predicting 300 will close in the next couple of years. They overbuilt malls in this country. We in Florida, in South Florida, I think we have 21 malls. We need to have maybe 15. So, and those malls are going to get knocked down and repurposed with multifamily because we have a shortage of housing in the country. And that's what's going to happen. We're going to have housing. We're going to have hospitals. We're going to have office parks. Well, we'll see about it. We were going to have office parks before COVID. The jury's out on that. But we're definitely going to have different uses on those mall sites because a lot of those mall sites are great real estate. So retail is not dead. But definitely there are some markets, like we have a submarket here where I told you I got the call, $25 a square foot. There's 40 empty shopping centers. Those 40 empty shopping centers, that's bad retail, and that they should be demolished and something else should be put there.
Yep. And when you hear of a market that's that empty, is it usually like a population flight? People are just leaving the area, or is there something else usually going on?
Yeah. It's a population flight and it's a demographic shift.
Yep.
You never want to, for me as a leasing agent, I never want to lease in a demographic shift from senior citizens to lower income African American. That is a problem, because who do you lease to? The hearing aid place, or another use that will cater to lower income demographic, like a check cashing. Yep. Like you can't, and they won't agree and they won't live together. So you never want to lease in a demographic shift.
Right. Okay. How can people find you or learn about what you're doing? This has been a phenomenal episode.
Thank you, Chris. So I'm on Twitter, Beth Azor 1. I'm also on Instagram, LinkedIn. It's all just Beth Azor.
Okay. Beth, seriously, this was one of my favorite episodes. You lived up to the queen status. I'd say you're even better than a queen if there was such a thing.
Thank you so much for having me, and I will see you on Twitter.
All righty. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much. Right. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hey everyone, it's Chris here again. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please follow the show on Apple, Spotify, or subscribe on YouTube. Thanks again, and I'll see you on the next episode.
Chris Powers is the founder and chairman of Fort Capital LP. All opinions from Chris and guests of the Fort podcast are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Fort Capital LP. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for real estate or investment decisions. The Fort with Chris Powers is produced by Straight Up Podcasts.